Do you think hosting a podcast alone is tough? Well, try doing it with someone else. Where managing different personalities and opinions and energies can be as challenging as choosing the right wine, right entree, or maybe even a lot harder. But fear not, because by the end of this episode, you're not only going to learn how to co-host like a pro, but I'm also going to reveal the single most important strategy I've used to ensure collaboration success. Trust me, you're going to want to hear this, and stick around for the end for a freebie you might want to take advantage of and an opportunity to talk to me personally. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro, your gateway to becoming a thought leader in your field. Dive into the world of elite podcasting and master the art of influence and inspiration. And now, podcast personality, award-winning author and actress, Anne Scottlin.
Hi, welcome back to Launch It, the Podcast Maestro with me, Anne Scottlin. I am here to give you the inside scoop on your podcasting success. And today I'm talking about collaborative podcasting. If you've ever wondered how some duos make it and some look so effortless, and some of the co-hosts you've seen me work with, well, I've got the answers. So let's dive into the art of co-hosting. But first of all, please like and subscribe. Love to hear from you. Shoot me your questions or comments right here in the feed where you're listening or watching today. Even shoot me an email directly, contact@annescottlin.com. I'd love to hear your questions, comments, and suggestions for the show. And copy and paste this link, whether it's streaming now or whether you're watching it afterwards. Shoot it to someone else who might enjoy this and jump in and have some fun with us for a few minutes. So why collaborative podcasting? That's a question a lot of people ask me when we're first getting started on them and their brand. And they're saying, okay, so should I be a solo show? Should I be a dual host show? Well, there's a lot of pros and cons to both. So let's talk about it. I think it's, Edison Research, I was looking up the other day, said that actually over 22% of podcasts have more than one host. So right there, you can already see that 80% of podcasts tend to be one solo host, but over 20% have a co-host. And why is that important? And this also seems to be a trend growing right now in co-hosted podcasting, just like trend in video podcasting over audio only podcasting. Co-hosting is cool, but it's not required. So we have known for ages how fun it is to have two hosts, whether it's Lennon and McCartney or Jordan and Pippin. The power of a dynamic duo is always just has something special to it, but it's not always smooth sailing in any show or in podcasting. So I'm going to help show you today, how do you turn that potential chaos, and what chaos could there possibly be, into amazing chemistry that really helps promote you and your brand. Okay, so understanding the power of having a co-host. Did you know that podcasts with two or more hosts have a 15% higher listener retention rate? That's according to PodTrack. So this is good, but it also tells you right away that this doesn't make or break a show. It really comes a lot down into your personal preference, what kind of audience you have, if they like a dynamic duo chat style format, or if they like hearing it from the authority figure right from the get-go, getting it in, out, done. That is really a matter of personality, a matter of your hosting style, and a matter of what your listeners or viewers want. It's because conversations between hosts often feel more natural and engaging that so many people do like to do it. If you've ever listened to the Smart Less podcast, right, with Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, Will Arnett, this is a really good example of how co-hosting can bring out the best in each of those three host personalities, right? The show's success really comes from their distinct, unique personalities. I mean, Bateman's dry and Arnett's sarcastic, and Hayes is always so enthusiastic. So working together, they create this amazing dynamic energy. And it's the variety in their delivery that really keeps the audience hooked. Now, this is an interesting point because sometimes it's the comfort of a solo host that also keeps people hooked. So they'll come into that space and they'll be like, oh, I'm in the Anne space. This feels great. I'm just going to listen, learn. I know the energy to expect. But then sometimes I might be bringing in guests or co-hosts in the future, and it changes it up. So you can test your audience with one or more of these opportunities. You can test solo hosting, co-hosting, solo hosting with guests, co-hosting with guests. See what kind of feedback you get by doing testing and making it intentional instead of just random. Let's try this and see how it works. Make it intentional and keep tracks of your metrics. So, but the chemistry between co-hosts, if you're going to have a co-host, chemistry is absolutely positively the most important thing, because each co-host brings their own energy, their own voice, their own experience in the subject matter. And that really matters whether the conversation is rich and lively. And I say lively because it can also be deathly boring. And maybe you've run into a few of those. I don't care what you are learning from a podcast. It is still an extension of, I say this, a set part of the center of the entertainment industry, whether it's for entertainment or education. Obviously, content will partly dictate the vibe of the show, but in general, most people would much rather listen to, I don't care if you're a lecturer at Harvard, a lively and rich conversation, or something that just drones on and on. Which one is going to keep you awake, engaged, and in the case of a podcast or video podcast, tuning back in, right? So, and this is, if you have a dud of a co-host, you're carrying all the weight, plus you're overcompensating for them, and it just doesn't ring clear. It feels awkward and bulky, and like everything is with effort, and the audience can feel that instantly, whether they know it or not. They can feel it, and it's going to affect your retention level, or how many people tune in and stay tuned for more than a couple minutes, right? So let's talk, how do you manage these different energies and opinions? I mean, balance is everything. So think of co-hosting as a seesaw, teeter-totter. What did you call it when you were a kid? I called it a teeter-totter, but then I don't know. Anyway, the thing that goes back and forth that you don't even see on playgrounds anymore because they're technically really dangerous, at least in some places. But you have to maintain balance. So you can have one host who's like a fact giver, and the other one can have color with stories and humor, but it needs to balance out. I've been in opportunities where I could co-host, and the other person was such a fact giver that they never kind of let me bring in the color and stories and humor on the other side. So you do have to find it. Or this might just be when you're starting a show, and over time you can find that balance. So the Daily Stoic, if you listen to that with Ryan Holiday, so he often pairs his philosophical analysis, right, with guest co-hosts, which is another interesting topic. Guest co-host, not co-host the same every week, anchor co-host, if you will. But he really pairs his philosophical vibe with co-hosts who bring these real world stories into the mix, and really creates this well-rounded, this balanced conversation, which I really love to listen to. So here's a tip for you. Assign the roles and make that clear from the beginning, but allow flexibility. In other words, one of the things I do, one of the services I offer as a host and co-host, is co-hosting for other people's shows. So when I set that up with them and they're like, I just do better with a co-host, someone to fill in the gaps, to keep the flow light and easy. They say, so, I want you to come in. I'm like, okay, well, let's assign roles. What kind of style? Are we both authorities on the subject? And if so, how do we want to rotate that so one person isn't monopolizing the conversation? On the other hand, do you want me to be a student of your expertise and ask you questions and let you answer them, and create this really kind of fun learning experience where we can play back and forth, but you're kind of the authority figure, right? Or do we both want to goof around and just make it fun, and then occasionally bring in elements of, seriousness through subject matter or guests? There's so many ways, but if you can have that conversation with your co-host in advance about assigning roles, it really helps create a sense of calm from the beginning. And then also explain, but we want to allow flexibility, mix it up, who takes the lead. Let's get a little experimental sometimes, right? Have that natural vibe that comes, but also know kind of what your job is. It's really hard to do your job well if you don't know what your job is. So have those discussions in advance. Decide who plays the support role, but don't just get stuck in a rigid pattern. And as I said before, communication is really key. So discuss everything. How long should each host talk? One of my go-tos, and it can vary by show, is no more than about 2 minutes per person. That is not a rule of thumb. That is based on some of the current shows I've been doing with other hosts. In other words, some people are used to lecturing and they will go on and on and on with really good content. But then what's the point of the other host even being there if they can't even comment or ask a question or interject? Or I'll have this great, amazing story come to mind that fits perfectly, but there's no place for me to ever jump in. And then they switch topics and you lose that opportunity altogether. Another thing that you want to talk about, which is really funny because it's like, we all go sometimes into podcasting or other production if we don't know better and be like, oh, we'll just see how it happens. It'll all unfold naturally and organically. It'll be great. But we never talk about things like contracts with exit strategies or how to handle disagreements. These are some of the smartest things you can discuss on the front end of your relationship or your show so that you don't run into a lot of really messy challenges midstream and everyone knows what to expect. So, for example, love him, hate him, no opinion, Joe Rogan and his former co-host Brian Redban, of course, from the Joe Rogan Experience, had that famous rough breakup, right, over creative differences. And Redban's humor often really clashed with Rogan's serious tone. And ultimately, they weren't working well off each other anymore. After a while, they were it's like having two single anchors pulling in different directions. But even later, Rogan admitted that they could have worked better as a team if they had really communicated their differences much sooner. So again, don't be afraid to jump in and communicate. Some of us have had to work that over the course of our life and career. Some of us really hate controversy and stressful conversations. But I have learned when you have those awkward conversations up front, when you establish clear expectations with both parties and create an open place to have those discussions, like once a week or once a month, we're going to have a coffee where we can there's nothing, clear the air, anything at all, and have fun, find out how we can support each other best, set up dynamic opportunities to converse and set up expectations in advance and then revisit them because it will change over time. When you're doing the first season of a show, it often takes a while to fall into a natural dynamic. Take any of your favorite multi-season TV shows with multiple characters, especially, and see how long it took them to kind of find their groove, find their rhythm with their fellow castmates, right? So it's the same when you're hosting a podcast, audio, video, find how to find that dynamic. It might take you a while to test it out. So don't set it rigidly, let it be flexible. So in your frequent and periodic reevaluation sessions with your co-host, you can talk about it and see how do you want to contour, change, slightly adapt the show to make it even more popular. And respect each other's strengths. This is such an important thing. How do you complement each other's strengths for a more dynamic show? For example, if one person is a preeminent fact giver, then you want to really feature them as that authority figure. But if they're dry and you bring spark, personality, fun, humor, and stories to it, you're tremendously complementing your overall presentation, not distracting from it, if you really study each other's strengths. So sit down and do a good old-fashioned mind map, if nothing else, on paper, digitally, I don't care. And what are your strengths? What are theirs? Talk about it, drag and drop, or use a pen, whatever. Do it on the back of a napkin, I don't care. Good old Hollywood style, right? But come up with what are your strengths and what do you want to play to in your role on this show? So another pair of hosts that I think of right now is Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard and Monica Padman, right? It really works because Padman reins in Shepard's but Shepard really provides the energy. So see how it's like this really delicate push and pull relationship where each host amplifies the other's strengths. Well, we're going to take a really quick break. I hope you're getting a ton of value out of this and deciding whether co hosting is for you. I am going to be right back. We're going to talk about how to continue to have that smooth collaboration with your co host and how to expect things before they happen and have a plan. So stick around. I'll be right back. Over the break, please do me a personal favor. Please subscribe, shoot me a message, check out the website, annescottlin.com, and shoot a link to someone who might like to listen to this episode as well. I'll be right back.
Picture this. You have worked your whole life to become an expert, a leader, a change maker, but you're so busy, most people will never discover you to recognize your work. Anne Scottlin, founder of Podcast Maestro, understands this challenge. With a decade of Hollywood experience and a proven track record as a business coach, Anne turns seasoned professionals into thought leaders through the art of podcasting. Podcast Maestro offers plug-and-play services, handling everything from pre-production to distribution, so you can focus on your message while Anne and her team manage the rest. Leverage Anne's Hollywood production knowledge, strategic business insight, and social media expertise to amplify your reach and impact. If you're ready to elevate your voice, connect with Anne Scottlin at Podcast Maestro and begin your podcast journey today.
Welcome back to part 2 today of Launch at the Podcast Maestro with myself, Anne Scottlin. And today we are talking about specifically, should you have a co-host or not on your video podcast, on your audio podcast, whatever the nature of your show is. When is a co-host a really good idea? When is it not so a good idea? And if you do decide to have a co-host, how do you find a balance? How do you understand the balance of power? How do you manage those different energies and opinions, which we've already talked about? I talked about how important communication is. Communication is so key, and how to both acknowledge and respect each other's strengths as you design the show that's really going to create a dynamic and entertaining impact for your audience. So, okay, smooth collaboration. Well, of course, especially if you're looking at a first series or a first season, practice makes perfect, like everything else. So do a few test episodes together. Just tape ahead of time before you go live. This is also, honestly, a genius way to have a couple backups in case of an emergency where someone's sick at the last minute for streaming live or something. You may or may not use these episodes, but do a few test episodes first. It's fun. There's so little pressure because you're just taping and it's not live. And you get this opportunity to build chemistry and find your rhythm. And he says this and I say that. And she makes this comment and I always roll my eyes or I always laugh. Or there's a thing like we have this dynamic where it's fun. When you watch two friends having fun, if they're talking about something that you really enjoy, a topic that interests you, then it's hard to not listen, because when they're having fun, remember, if you're having fun, let's phrase it that way, your audience is probably having fun too. If you're like, oh my God, this is over, they're probably feeling the same way. So just know whatever energy you're experiencing is going to be very similar to what your audience is experiencing in most cases. So be very aware of it. So you can do all kinds of things, right? It's your show. Practice, have mock debates or do simple interviews. You can just test each other out. And then over time, that back and forth will really become a lot more natural. Another point is to really establish your boundaries early. Well, what does that mean? Boundaries is such an overused word. I really want another word. You know me, I always like to create new vocabulary. So if you have a better idea than that, please send it to me, because I really hate saying the word boundaries. It's so overdone. Anyway, since you know what that word means, decide on key issues like, whose are the production responsibilities? If you're going in on a show with someone else, say you're splitting costs or investment time, who's responsible for doing all the editing and production? And distribution, who's creating all the social media marketing promotions and content? You know, that's something I do for my clients, because most of my clients don't want to bother with any of that. They're like, I just want to plug and play. Can I show up for 25 minutes and just talk, me or my co-host, or 60 minutes, whatever? Can you pull up an outline for us? Can we just go? Can we have fun? Can you take it from there, edit it, fix it, add things, add visuals, insert the commercials in the right place, put it on the audio platforms, put it on the audio video platforms, put it on my social media? I don't have time to mess with these things, but I think this is something that the public is really going to love. So please do it for me. That's the easy way to do it, I can say. But if you're not doing that, if you're not using a pre, during, and post producer, then talk about whose job is it? And let's not create a lot of friction and also cost, right? I had an example one time where there was a misunderstanding on who was going to be paying for the cost of the show. And it ended up being me, which of course had some of its own cons. And so I had to decide, is having this person a co-host is important as the bottom line? Are they bringing in more because they're on the show or not? And then you get to make that judgment call, or offer to have them start sharing costs, or decide to go solo, decide to get a different co-host. There is no right or wrong answer. It's one you get to make, thank goodness for yourself. But these are so much better handled if you think about it in advance. So just help prevent that future friction possibilities. Like My Favorite Murder, the podcast. So Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark, they sit down. They sat down before they even started the show, and they set clear boundaries. They've said in interviews that how they were going to distribute the workload once the podcast really took off, because they said if you don't set roles, we would have not been able to sustain the show. It would have been too much. This helped them continue growing without completely burning out, which is something that we do talk about, podcast fatigue. We've mentioned it in other episodes, and we're going to talk about it again, very likely next episode, actually. So yeah, really explore those roles. Stay flexible. Sometimes your co-host will really surprise you with a new idea or direction. And if you're a certain kind of personality, you're like, no, that's not what this show is about. This is never what the intention of this show is. Couple things. One, if you can't stand it, don't do it. And also realize you may not have a co-host anymore. Alternatively, be flexible. Be open to new ideas, new directions they might suggest, appreciate the insight they might have, and be open to adjusting and changing formats when it's needed. And let the metrics answer the question. You can never do enough testing. Check other episodes for more on that, or reach out to me. You can never do enough testing. So before you just shoot an idea down, try it. Besides, for one episode, if you try something totally different, your audience is going to recognize it and they're going to react one way or the other, right? It's like, we love this, or we hated it. We'll see which one rises to the surface, right? But just be open to adjust that format when it's actually needed. Stuff You Should Know, another great podcast with Josh Clark, of course, and Chuck Bryant. And they've been podcasting together for years, I think over a decade. And their episodes often take these unexpected turns because they really allow room for flexibility. That's actually become part of their brand. It's what their viewers and listeners appreciate and expect. And that spontaneity really keeps the audience engaged. So that's become literally part of their brand, right? Well, then when to walk away? We hinted on this a few minutes ago. I hinted on there might be parting of the ways at some times for a variety of reasons, but give yourself an out for starters. Have an agreement or contract that does have an exit agreement, an exit policy. How do we draw things to an end while maintaining a congenial relationship? We don't have to go to war on this. Have the financial elements spelled out, have the responsibilities spelled out, have the contract or agreement spelled out. Did someone sign on to stick around for the whole season, or is it month to month? What is the agreement? And know when they have or haven't violated that agreement, or if you're willing to make exceptions, but spell it out in advance. I'm not talking about getting a lawyer unless you're already a really famous person, a famous host. I'm just saying at least get it down on a 2 to 4 page document, so that everyone is really clear, signs it, dates it. At least it shows goodwill and you have a plan for moving forward. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, the collaboration isn't working. So knowing when to pivot or even part ways is really crucial. The co-hosts Alexandra Cooper and Sophia Franklin had Call Her Daddy, the podcast Call Her Daddy. Their partnership fell apart over creative and financial disagreements, which is almost always one of those two things, and occasionally it's just interpersonal. But so it was a really tough break for them and their audience and their fans. but it also demonstrates the importance of really having those clear expectations, that clear communication right from the start. So my final thought for you today is really trust your gut on this. Trust your gut on the topic of hosting solo or co-hosting. And if the energy is dragging with either as a solo host or as a co-host, then maybe it's time to refresh your format or just mix it up or bring in a third voice or make a clean break or switch it up by season or test it during one season and see what your fans say is the absolute hands down favorite. So do those things and play with it and just see how it goes. But from the very beginning, most importantly, if I never say anything else, if you never take anything else away from the show, trust your gut. Because every time I've trusted my gut, things have gone extremely well. And every time I've pushed it because I wanted it, or I wanted to be affiliated with someone else's name on a show, or when I was pushing, there's something about it. It just doesn't work. It's like from the day one, this might be great for my brand, but pushing it is not going to be a win-win chemistry in the end. So balance the energy, communicate often, plan in advance, respect each other's strengths. It's really all just about creating this dynamic, seamless partnership that keeps your listeners coming back for more. That is the most important. And finally, a final tip I promised you, my number one strategy for co-hosting success. I already mentioned it. Schedule off-air time to really build that personal rapport, not just for solving issues over a virtual coffee once a month, but just to create fun outside the studio, virtual or literal, whether you go do fun things together socially or with your families, or just the more at ease your chemistry is off air, the more at ease your chemistry is on air. And the people I've had the best chemistry with as co-hosts have been people that I've known for a while or have a serious passion that are very similar to mine. But for the actual chemistry, knowing them well or getting to know them well as you start the show is really, really important. So if you are even thinking about starting a podcast with a friend or a colleague, think about it. Get started. Why not? Take the plunge. It is fun. You have all the resources you need right here on Launch It, the Podcast Maestro, and more on my website, AnneScottlin.com. And if you've already got a co-host, take a moment to check in. Make sure you're both still on that same page. I mean, trust me, the payoff is absolutely worth it. And if you'd ever like co-hosting or producing, if you'd like someone to come in and help you co-host or produce, guess what I do? Again, reach out to me at AnneScottlin.com. You can even email me directly if you like. No big secret. contact@AnneScottlin.com. If you are looking to bring on a co-host to your show, whether it's me or someone else in my sphere that might be a great match for you, reach out and let me know. And then just now, before I sign off, the promised freebie for you today. If you would like to start a podcast, if you are looking for someone to produce it, or you're looking for a co-host that you're interested in hiring to bring on to your show, reach out to me again, same email, contact@AnneScottlin.com. Tell me you're interested in a 20-minute consultation. I'll shoot you back the application for that, and you can fill it out and send it in to me for that complimentary 20-minute consultation on how to jumpstart your show off the ground and make it an amazing success. Because I'm Anne Scottlin, the Podcast Maestro. Your success is my success. Thank you so much for listening. Come back next week, same time, same place, and we'll be bringing you more incredible content at that time. In the meantime, be well, and I look forward to hearing from you, your comments, and your emails. Cheers.